I think if we go back to in history, then the movement of early music is actually quite old. And we find the first academies of ancient music in the 18th century, really, and um, the bar line that a piece had to qualify to jump over was it had to be older than 10 years to be considered part of that Academy of Ancient Music activities. So that's a lot of our contemporary music would qualify as ancient music. So I think the movement is quite old, and I think it became stronger, if I'm correct with that, in the early 1900s.
Okay.
Which I find interesting because at least for the continental Western music, those decades are decades of disruption or demolition, if you want. So the whole evolution of music history, I think, can be described as a continuum, pretty much to those 1920s, 30s, and then with both those world wars and the scrupula that an artist would feel in the 1940s after all those atrocities to use words, to use notes, to do any of that. I think a German philosopher and musicologist Adorno once said, after Auschwitz, you can't write a poem anymore. It's impossible. So I think there's that huge disruption in a continuum of music making, which has a few side branches, if you want. One, I think, is that the idea of a performer composer actually ceased to exist. So up into the early 1900s, there were those figures of Brahms still being one of them who would perform and compose. So not just be a performer only. And I think that stopped at some point. And we have those composers as the century goes on and performers, but hardly anybody who excels in both. At the same time, jazz becomes a very important motion. So I think in all of the turmoil, the turning to early music became stronger, searching for a authenticity, if you want, of music making. But then in a more commercial sense, the whole period performance practice, I think, is more of an invention of the record industry in the 70s and 80s, where the authentic way of doing it was sort of marketed. Even though I think every musician looks for that, I don't think that those pioneers like Harnoncourt or Gustav Leonhardt and all of those were actually thinking of themselves as the authentic way. I don't think they would have claimed that label, if it makes sense. So I think that's rather the recording industry, who at that point of time was quite healthy and making a lot of money of that new idea. And ever since, the period performance practice I think, has spread. So you will find it in every modern conventional symphony orchestra. Many of them use Baroque bows or adopt some of those techniques. I think when it comes down to everyday life, in a musician's life, it is studying a piece, trying to understand what the composer wants to tell. So you need to understand the context. Obviously, you need to understand the zeitgeist of a composition, and a very helpful way to understand it are the tools, are the instruments of that time. I don't think that means that you can use only those and only those in a certain way, even though each of us, as we study and progress, probably will have the idea of what it's supposed to be. But I think the truth is that there is no truth. And I think approaching pieces that would qualify as ancient, so older than 10 years, and by the instruments that the composer was having in mind writing them, with the means as we are able to understand of their time, but approaching them as something that's new and alive and interesting. I think that's in a sum what we try to achieve.